Siamo qui per festeggiare con la famiglia Begnoni dell'azienda Santa Sofia i 50 anni del loro vino di punta, Amarone della
We are here to celebrate with the Begnoni family of Santa Sofia the 50th anniversary of their top wine, the Amarone della Valpolicella Classico Gioè, whose evolution in bottle you will soon have a chance to taste. It has only been released 17 times in the last 50 years. Someone said jokingly that, in this case, 17 is a lucky number. Because indeed, in this period, the company has gone from strength to strength. Speaking with Giancarlo Begnoni and with Luciano, who are respectively to my left and right, while preparing this tasting over the last few days, we pinpointed the fact that this wine really marked the beginning of Giancarlo's career of 56 vintages. With this wine, Giancarlo began his career as a creator, if I may use that term, of very high-quality wines. Our idea, in view of the expertise of the audience, is that it will be up to you as you taste the wines to comment, speak about them, and discuss them amongst yourselves and with Giancarlo and Luciano. It will be a sort of happening, also because it is essentially unrepeatable. Because this is a celebration, we have decided to offer this technical tasting along with, at the end, a tasting matching the wines with different dishes. Luciano Begnoni has asked Giancarlo Begnoni, who is working silently at the back of the room, those of you who know him already have recognized him, to treat us to 3 small dishes, 3 tasting samples. So we will be able to see what degree of evolution of this Amarone goes best with the dishes he has devised. But we will return to that theme later. Now perhaps Giancarlo Begnoni can tell us how Gioè came into being. What were his intentions, or indeed the chance occurrences that led him to make this wine?
Come è nato il Gioè? Io sono entrato in Santa Sofia e ho cominciato a fare
What was the genesis of Gioè? Well, I started working at Santa Sofia and began making the company's Amarone Classico starting in 1964. I made the 64 and then the 66. But of the 64, I had a barrel that was simply fantastic. Then we went on to make the 67, but I wanted to highlight the quality of that 64 because it didn't make any sense to just add that 64 to another wine that was under the same label. And that's how the story of Gioè began. Gioè, by the way, is the zone above Monte Gradella. We went on ahead in this way for several years. In the best vintages, I set aside between 8,000 and 15,000 bottles, no more. And we have now arrived at the wine we have today, the 2007. We're now in 2014, and I said to myself, I started in 1964. It's now 50 years. Let's highlight this 50th anniversary. So we made a special label for this vintage on which we have written that it is the 50th anniversary wine. But immediately below there are all the vintages of this wine that we have produced. Because the wine has existed for 50 years, but there have been only 17 vintages, including the current one, 2007. The next one is now in barrique and will be the 2011. The vintages that we have made are 64, 67, 69, 71, 74, 77, 83, 85, 90, 93, 95, 97, 98.
You know them off by heart.
2000, 2003 and 2007. But if you ask me what I had to eat yesterday, I can't remember.
Allora, quello che forse Giancarlo non mette in evidenza perché quando si è dentro le cose non si vede.
Perhaps what Giancarlo hasn't underlined, because when you're intimately involved in something, you aren't always aware, for good or ill, of what you have achieved.
Il fatto di aver pensato di prendere
is, in my opinion, the fact that he thought about taking wine from a specific barrel which came from a particular vineyard without necessarily referring to it as a cru. Nevertheless, the grapes came from the highest part of Monte Gradella. This, for me, is the long-sighted approach which gave rise to this wine. We have to bear in mind the era in which it was created.
Tra l'altro volevo dire, noi abbiamo fatto queste 17 vendemmie.
In addition, I would like to add that we have made these 17 vintages,
Temperature molto alte.
but in recent years a lot has changed, such as very high temperatures. For example, 2003 was a very hot year, but all the same, we made a really good Gioè. The 2007, the last wine to be poured, but the first that we will taste, the current vintage, was also a very hot year. These are the data of this 2007. 15.25% alcohol by volume, 36.7 dry extract, around 6.1 of fixed acidity. However, even though it was a very hot year, it turned out to be a fabulous wine. And so we deemed it worthy to be a Gioè vintage. I always try to make wines that are easy to drink. I'm not interested in making wines that have lots of colour and lots of body, but which may sometimes be overbearing. I want to make wines that, if two friends get together and have a snack, with a glass of wine here and a glass of wine there, they can drink the whole bottle. Enjoyable drinking, that's the goal of people like me who make wine.
Vi raccontavo, nato da uve che
As I said, it was originally made from grapes that came from a specific place. In fact, over the years, the origin of the grapes, even if we are still in Valpolicella Classico, now come from Fumane. Help me out with this.
At
a certain point, Gioè became one of our brands. It comes from vineyards in the zones of Fumane, San Pietro in Cariano and Negrar. And along the way, I keep on making changes and trying out new things. We began to use barrique. You have various vintages in front of you. The 77, for example, spent 5 years in 9 hectolitre oak casks. For the last wine, the 2007, in line with the more recent vintages, this becomes 24 months in Slavonian oak and 18 months in barrique. Because at a certain point in 1993, we started using barrique, as I had used them for 2 other wines which I had invented by the name of Predaia and Aleo. As I had these barrique in the cellar, I tried using them for the Amarone Gioè as well. Because this turned out well, we gradually changed from the 5 years in 9 hectolitre oak casks. We gave the 1998 36 months in casks and 12 months in barrique. In the 2007, we have 24 months in cask and 18 in barrique. There are 2 important periods for making wines in the correct manner: maturation in wood and bottle aging. We focus a great deal on giving our wines bottle age. Jokingly, I might say that our competitors bottle wines and take home the profits right away, whereas I bottle them and put them in the cellar 1, 2 or 3 years in order for the aromas to develop, because in the barrels the aromas only begin to be formed. In wines, there are alcohols and acids, and these blend together in the presence of the oxygen that passes through the pores of the wood, giving us esters. These components give us the bouquet, but this is a very long process. When I bottle a wine, inside the bottle, there is still a lot of oxygen in the wine that it has absorbed in the barrel, but which has not yet been consumed in creating aromas. After 1 year, I have a certain result. After 3, another. After 5, yet another. That is why it is very important to age a wine in bottle in order to develop its aromas.
Ecco, dal punto di vista così della comunicazione.
What can you say from the point of view of marketing and sales?
Allora, da un punto di vista commerciale, il Gioè è...
From my point of view, the Gioè is the jewel in our crown. I try to give all of our clients a small allocation. Because, as there isn't a Gioè every year, I try to manage the quantity available so that it can always be found on the world's most important wine lists.
Noi che adesso vendiamo in più di 50 paesi, cerco di darne proprio piccole quantità, assegnazioni.
We sell in over 50 countries, and I try to assign small quantities to each importer, as well as maintaining a strategic stock for events like this one, or for potential new clients.
Il taglio commerciale di questo grande vino. Non ce n'è mai abbastanza comunque.
That's the commercial reality of this great wine, of which there just isn't enough. As my father said earlier, in 67 there were 7,020 bottles. Then, depending on the vintage, the average is between 14,000 and 18,000 bottles.
In realtà il percorso fatto dalla famiglia Begnoni per praticamente quasi tutti i vini è quello
In
di
fact,
avere dei rapporti
the course taken by the Begnoni family for practically all of its wines is to have privileged relationships with certain vine growers, who Mr. Begnoni refers to as friends.
Yes, they've been my friends for 50 years.
Lavorano insieme da 50 anni. E quindi c'è questo,
He doesn't need to call them up. They've been working together for 50 years. So there exists this special relationship.
Che sono state le evoluzioni tecniche in viticoltura in Valpolicella.
And so the technical developments in terms of viticulture in Valpolicella, and in this area in particular, have been taken on as well by his friends who supply their grapes.
Anche per avere una costanza qualitativa, noi avevamo bisogno di fidelizzare.
To have constant quality, it was important for us to establish a relationship of loyalty with these grape suppliers.
Proprio un rapporto. Gestiamo noi direttamente questi
As a result, it is essentially we who manage their vineyards. To go on making Gioè for 50 years, we simply had to have the same suppliers. There has been an evolution over the course of time, though. Valpolicella was once all pergola trained, with 2,500 vines per hectare. Gradually we moved to 4,000 to 4,500 vines per hectare, and then came espalier systems or the Y-shaped pergoletta.
Ecco, l'altra cosa che vi volevo raccontare non ha dignità di aneddoto.
Another thing I wanted to tell you, it's not exactly an anecdote. As an ex-corrector of drafts for newspapers,
ho visto un Gioè.
I immediately noticed that there was a different accent on the E in Gioè on the label and a different accent on the company's communications. So when I had to write the press releases, I asked what I should use, thinking that probably the label was the right version. Any of us would have thought that was the case. On the other hand, I discovered that behind the incorrect, or should I just say different, use of accents between the label and the promotional material lies the fact that the Begnonis have a sort of difficult relationship with accents. Because I discovered this isn't an isolated case. Another wine, Arleo, is written one way on the label and actually pronounced in a different way.
L'ultimo che ho fatto.
The most recent wine I have made, because it was the last, I called it Arleo. As those of you who are Veronese would know, in our dialect it would be Aleo, with a stress on the O. Aleo is the equivalent of the Italian allievo, or student, in the sense of someone or something you have trained. So the name refers to a child or an animal you have reared. Because it was the most recent release, I decided to use that term. However, because I had made a very substantial wine with barrique aging and 14.5 degrees of alcohol, 2 years in oak, 18 months in barrique and actually almost 4 years bottle aging in order to develop all of its aromas, calling it a student would have been demeaning. So I changed the accent. And I did tell everyone, but we never checked how the printer originally wrote the accent. And he wrote it as Aleo.
Quindi ecco, quando avrete imbarazzo nello scrivere il Gioè, un po' decidete.
So when you are uncertain about how to write Gioè, it's really up to you to decide. But they prefer it with a Grave accent. But here's the scoop. With the next vintage, 2011, Santa Sofia will return to using a Grave accent on the label as well.
L'etichetta è un'etichetta particolare, un'etichetta del cinquantenario.
The label is a special one for the 50th anniversary. It has elements that recall not only the vintages that have previously been released, but also the company's beautiful headquarters, perhaps the only Palladian villa in the province of Verona, and to which certain elements in the label refer.
The cellar dates back to the 14th century. It's called Santa Sofia because there is also a chapel of Santa Sofia built by the friars of San Bernardino in the 14th century. At that time, these monks owned the church and the cellar. There's always been wine in Valpolicella. So here we have a relic of the 14th century that has an earthenware floor and tufa ceiling vaults.
Per legge non si potevano mettere altri.
According to the regulations, there couldn't be other numbers or vintages on the label apart from the actual one. So to be in line with the law and with Sicuria, we developed a technique so that, depending on how you look at the label, you can see or not the other vintages. Do you all have the wines now? Can we start the tasting?
I'd just like to say, I don't know which bottle of the 77 that I got, which is the first wine that I sniffed, but it went straight to my heart. That's the sort of tasting that you're going to get from me today.
Ho notato in maniera veramente sorprendente ed emozionante la somiglianza tra
I was surprised and excited to note the similarity between the last wine, the one we have here on the left, and the 2000. It is as if there was a line, a common denominator which one finds in the glass, even though there are many years between them. It really is exciting.
Io nel 1977 avevo 30 anni. Ero un leone.
In 1977, I was 30 years old, and I was a lion. Probably I was a lion in the same way this wine is. Over time, it has evolved into an elephant, not a pachyderm, an elephant in the sense of its memory, an elephant in the sense that it has within it a very long life. It is an elegant wine, a philosopher's wine. Over time, I have become quite naturally something of a philosopher, something of a thinker. But it isn't a granddad of a wine. It is a wine that still has dreams. I see myself in this wine, and it has filled me with a great many emotions. Therefore, I want to say to the Begnonis, thank you. Because not only have you succeeded in bottling a wine, but also in bottling some of your, mine, and I think some other people's humanity as well. Thank you.
Grazie.
Mi piace sottolineare di questa lungo in termini temporali.
I would like to underline the great stylistic coherence there is in this large range of vintages, 30 years from first to last. Because in all of these wines there is a very notable acidity, which makes the wine extremely easy to drink in all its vintages. There may be some vintages that are hotter and therefore more full-bodied, but for me, the common denominator of this tasting is the great drinkability of these wines. And it's something I would like to stress, because often when we think of Amarone, we don't think of it as a quaffable wine. This is the feature that emerges most strongly in this tasting, that is to say, in the gustatory analysis of these wines. And then there is the fruit. For example, the explosive bitter cherry flavor of the 2007, but which you will also find in the older vintages. The fact that you can find real fruitiness in a wine even after 20 years means that it is very well made, because otherwise it would have disappeared by now. So congratulations and thank you. It was really a very interesting experience.
Grazie Stefania. Io adesso non so se riusciremo a tenere Giancarlo.
Thank you, Stefania. Now I don't know if we will be able to keep Giancarlo Begnoni in his seat, because he'll be jumping for joy right now.
Di uve magnifiche che arrivano da vigneti.
Because Gioè is undoubtedly made from magnificent grapes that come from vineyards in exceptional sites. That is to say, wonderful grapes.
In qualche maniera lui fa
But then there is the process those grapes go through in the winery, the nurturing he bestows on them, the interpretation of the wine, and the realization of exactly what the future holds in store for it, as we have seen here in our glasses. All this is really the result of the knowledge and hard work of Giancarlo Begnoni.
What Stefania and before her our good friend Morello said just goes to confirm my philosophy of an easy drinking style, of wines that are made to be drunk, of an ongoing style that is typical of the zone, a linear quality.
No, volevo solo capire se c'era una scelta a priori nelle annate che sono portate.
I just wanted to know if there was a prize selection of the vintages that you brought here today for tasting, apart from starting off, of course, with the 1977, to which I would like to add my personal praise, because a wine of this type that you can drink very happily without strange off-flavours, it really is good. And I'll just limit myself to saying that. With the others, I'd like to know why you chose them, because personally, the wine I found most elegant, and this is just a question of personal taste, so I'd like to hear what other people think as well, is the 1998. It's a fabulous wine compared to all the others. If I had to choose one to drink today, that's the one for me. Did you rate them in some way or other? Our rating was based on the fact that the choice was forced on us. We're just craftsmen of wine, and we didn't think when we made the early vintages to set a certain number of bottles aside and take particular care of them. In fact, I have to tell you that we actually mistreated some of them. We moved them from one part of the cellar to the other. Sometimes it was colder, sometimes warmer. I just chose the vintages based on availability. Earlier, Clementina mentioned our Palladian Villa. The Palladian Villa is stunning, but it is difficult to work in. The room we have to work in is what it is, so we, in fact, always try to find the best way to store the bottles, sometimes by moving them from one place to another. Another anecdote, I've been responsible for sales only for 25 years. For the other 25, it was my father, and he sold everything, the entire production. I've even gone so far as to buy back various vintages from clients. So now we have them all, but in very limited quantities.
I just wanted to understand, at what age do you think your Amarones are really right to drink? There's particularly two reasons for it. I think the 2007, the one that we have here, is still too young to drink, whereas the 95 is really at the top of its game. You know, it's really drinking fantastic. 98 probably still can last even longer. Now, why I say this is because in India we don't have cellaring conditions. You know, being a hot country, you don't have cellaring conditions. So it's very difficult for anybody to probably, you know, even think of drinking the 95 or the 98. They will probably be drinking the very most recent vintage. And the recent vintage here at the 2007, still very young. You know, so I was wondering at what age perhaps you think that your Amarones can be drunk. I know 2007 is still very, very young. Thank you.
Allora, da un punto di vista prettamente commerciale,
from a purely commercial point of view, we are one of the very few wineries among the 300 producers currently making Amarone
a uscire dopo 7 anni con l'Amarone, e per cui
who bring out their Amarone after 7 years. Yes, I am talking about the Gioè. And so it is a major effort in every sense of the word.
Comunque vediamo che anche
we think that this latest vintage is already ready for the marketplace. However, everyone, particularly in hot countries like Singapore as well, may want to keep the wine a bit longer, because there is a desire to serve and drink them several years later.
Ci sono stati dei momenti, leggendo le schede tecniche, che siete passati dai 12
Reading the technical sheets, there have been times when you passed from 12 months in Slavonian oak casks to 36 months in Slavonian oak and 12 months in barrique, then to 24 in Slavonian oak and 18 in barrique. How did this evolution take place? And another question, which has to do with the 100 days of semi-drying that appear on each information sheet. Have you never tried drying the grapes for 110 or maybe 90 days? Or is it set down by law?
quelli di giorni è sempre circa, perché dipende da una vendemmia all'altra, da un'annata
The question of how many days is always an approximation. It depends on the vintage, whether you can increase the number or otherwise. We didn't want to specify 97 or 103 or 105. It's just an approximation.
Se andiamo indietro di 30 anni, il recciotto della Val Policella era...
For example, when we make recciotto, 30 years ago, recciotto della Valpolicella had 13 degrees of alcohol and 70 to 80 grams per litre of residual sugar. Recently, it has become a wine with 14.5% alcohol and 125 grams per litre of sugar. It has become much richer, so it needs more time. As I said earlier, when I started having barrique in the winery to produce other wines I wanted to make, I gradually started experimenting. Maybe after 2 or 3 years, I'd say, this wine's starting to fall apart a bit. Maybe next year I'll keep it a bit longer. These are things that you learn as you go along. We eventually arrived at these aging parameters. I think that the duration that we have come up with in recent years, 2 years in Slavonian oak and 18 months in barrique, works well. Recently we've tried to increase the time in wood. With this 2007, we waited. We bottled it on the 2nd of February of 2 years ago. We doubled the time. It seems like an infant, but it has already spent time in cask, barrique, and bottle. In 30 years' time, I think it will be at the level of the 1977, if not even better.
Personalmente trovo che il 77 è ancora una piccolo nota di frutto.
Personally, I find the 77 still has a slight fruity note. I don't know if my colleagues have perceived this sensation too. I was immediately drawn to the last wine because you can taste bitter cherries, wild strawberries, and a certain meatiness. But out of curiosity, I went to retaste the first one. And in my personal opinion, and I repeat, it's just my opinion, I think it mirrors it very elegantly. Thank you.
Il 77 e il 95 hanno questo loro rigore, questa eleganza, questa finezza.
The 77 and the 95 have a certain rigor, this elegance, this finesse. Notes that are rather balsamic, vegetal and very fine. These are wines that are much more elegant than the 98, 2000 and 2007. I've always been convinced that better Amarones come from cool years rather than hot ones. But here the stylistic divergence seems particularly marked. I don't agree at all that there is uniformity of style in these wines. Rather, I see lots of differences.
Tu dici l'annata marca molto in annate che si presuppongono calde.
So you are saying that the year really affects the wine, so that in hot vintages one should pick earlier.
Yes, I think that could be a solution. I prefer the 98. Why? Because even though it's a hot year, it has a backbone of acidity that holds this wine together and gives it greater length. And I think this wine has the potential to develop further. That's my impression. The 2000 does reflect the fact that it was a very hot year, but it isn't underpinned by a good framework of acidity, which I find much more elegant in the 98.
Isao. What might people say about these wines in Japan?
Come tutti hanno puntualizzato, questi vini eleganti sono molto gastronomici, quindi viene ovviamente salutato dalla cucina.
As everyone has underlined, these are elegant wines that go very well with food and are therefore enhanced by Pebellini's cuisine. From a foreigner's point of view, I think these various styles of Amarone have to be explained well. Otherwise, consumers will be rather confused. There exist Amarones with a very high level of residual sugar. I'm not talking about these. A style which is all the same enjoying a certain success abroad. And there are wines like this that are very suited to being drunk with food. They're designed to be drunk together with food. It's fine that both types should exist as long as they have their devotees. But this has to be communicated better. Maybe the Consorzio should make an effort to communicate that there are various types of Amarone, and one must choose according to one's requirements. I'm scared that there might be a bit of confusion.
Nel 2007 ci sono 7 grammi zucchero e tra l'altro assaggiandone
In the 2007, there are 7 grams per litre of sugar, and tasting lots of Amarones, as I do, ours is one of those with the lowest sugar levels. Many have over 10 or 12 grams of sugar. The wine's apparent sweetness is partly due to its use.
No, mi piace che sia stato toccato questo punto perché è un punto che come giornalista ma soprattutto come membro della confraternita dell'Amarone.
I'm glad that this point has been brought up because it's a question that has arisen as a journalist but also as a member of the Wine Brotherhood of Amarone. Last year we saw how Amarone was perceived abroad, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon world, in a very confused way, either as a wine with higher sugar levels or rather as a more food-friendly one like this one.
Non so se i produttori o il consorzio deve focalizzare, perché effettivamente portare un Amarone molto zuccherino.
I think this is a point on which producers or the consorzio have to focus, because matching a very sugar-rich Amarone with dishes like this would create a very bad impression for Amarone in general. I'd like to ask, seeing that this Amarone is now 50 years old, how your choice to make an Amarone that was so easy and pleasant to drink fits in, how you managed to keep this philosophy even at times when the market was asking for big, powerful Amarones. This was a real act of courage on your part, because many producers tried to make Amarones that were either recioto-like or very big and concentrated. This has always been my idea, as I said earlier, to make a wine that is easy to drink.
Giancarlo Begnoni, che in questi giorni, in queste ultime settimane, praticamente ha fatto la spola con
So, Giancarlo Begnoni in the last few weeks has been commuting between Verona and Hong Kong, where he has opened the Locanda per Begnoni. We have caught him between flights,
Luciano è riuscito a convincerlo.
And Luciano has convinced him to come here and create 3 sample dishes for us to go with the Gioè. But I would also like to ask Luciano why he was so keen to have Giancarlo Begnoni here.
È un legame che ho con Giancarlo da tanti anni.
My relationship with Giancarlo goes back many years. I consider myself an ambassador for our wines around the world.
Giro anch'io tutte le settimane e lui lo stesso e di
I
conseguenza
travel almost every week, and he does too. And so we both have the same way of doing things. We both try to do our best and do things really well.
Di fare del nostro meglio, di farle bene e di portarle in giro per il mondo.
We travel around the world and both enjoy great success. I really wanted to have him here on this unrepeatable occasion, as it is only going to happen once every 50 years.
Adesso poi Giancarlo ci dirà meglio, ecco che
Soon Giancarlo will say a few words. Oh, I see that Luigi Cremona has gate crashed.
è che magari meglio di me può raccontare quello che Giancarlo ha pensato di fare con
And maybe he better than I can explain what Giancarlo has sought to do by combining the wines with pistachios, which have a certain oiliness and sweetness.
Non l'ho assaggiato, però Giancarlo è una sicurezza, per cui
I haven't tasted it yet, but Giancarlo can always be relied on. Now he's dividing his time between Hong Kong and Isola-Rizza, and now there is Stockholm too, because we have to defend the Bocuse Prize in the international competition. He has to organize that as well. He's busy on lots of fronts, but the important thing, as we can see, is that he always lives up to his reputation.
L'idea di far assaggiare, cioè di partire da un antipasto.
The idea was to start with an hors d'oeuvre and to finish with a meat course. As I'm never quite sure when to serve Amarone, here we have a very precise idea. So we started with an antipasto of very fresh meat, which is a little bit fatty, but in my opinion it goes very well with the 1977. Then there's an intermezzo, which is a chickpea soup, served using a siphon and so very airy, with a strong entry on the palate, but which then just leaves the main flavour with a fatty element, which was the burrata. And the finale, which is one of our classic dishes, braised veal cheek. In this case, we made it into a cube, cooked pink. Why? Because we had a young wine and we wanted to have meat that was fresh rather than stewed. So we made our basic braised veal with pureed potatoes, but we kept the meat pink. But the real protagonist is the Gioè, and I think it has performed really brilliantly.
Ma esatto, era questa, l'abbiamo detto prima, questa sfida anche, no, da parte di Giancarlo di trovare degli abbinamenti che non, appunto, abbinamenti, lo dice la parola, dove non ci fosse una prevaricazione del vino sul piatto e del piatto sul vino.
As we said earlier, Giancarlo's challenge was to find matches in which the wine did not overpower the food, and vice versa. I think it was a great success. What did you think of the pairings? Which did you think worked well? People are suggesting that the portions are too small.
Niente. Giancarlo, ci vuoi dire un'ultima cosa? Ti volevo chiedere appunto quello che ci siamo un po' detti, e cioè come viene fuori
Okay, Giancarlo, I would like to ask you one last thing. How has your way of cooking evolved in the last few years in view of the various restaurants that you are opening around the world?
The basic idea is always to offer seasonal food. That is absolutely fundamental. Then, at the moment, as we're doing a lot abroad, we're concentrating on traditional local cuisine, which we reinterpret in a modern way. If you look closely, we've used products from southern Italy, a dish like the chickpea cream, which is a Tuscan dish from central Italy, and we finished with braised veal, a classic dish of the north. We concentrate very much on the Italian tradition and reinterpret it.
Per me è balsamo, diciamo, per le mie orecchie, sentire.
This is music to my ears to hear a chef, a cook, at this level, who is working with the Italian tradition as a whole, and not just from a regional point of view. One who has succeeded in highlighting not only seasonal ingredients, but also the deep-seated culture, which has its roots in all of Italy's regions. It's fantastic.
My pleasure. Grazie sempre di tutto.
Questa è tua? Yeah, but this is not near to the restaurant. I know. If you want to come in the restaurant for me, I bring somebody. From where you come from? No,